Hey guys, welcome back to Read Aloud. We are reading The Tale of Despereaux by Dicamillo. When we were last here, Mig and Oscuro had kidnapped the princess. There's Mig's big kitchen knife. Oscuro's up there on her shoulder with the spoon on her head. And there's the princess. Her little eyes poking out, and she kind of knows what's going on. But even when they've taken her down to the dungeon, the princess has what for Meg? Empathy. She still feels the pain that Meg must feel, what's causing her to do this. Sympathy is when you kind of feel sorry for somebody or understand what they're going through, but not on a surface level. But empathy is where you really feel what their thinking must be and where their heart is. So the princess is very discerning about that and very thoughtful and insightful and emotional about it, even though she knows she might be going to her death. Chapter 39. Missing. The sun rose and shed light on what Oscuro and Miggery Sow had done. And finally, Despereaux awoke. But alas, he awoke too late. "I haven't seen her," Louise was shouting, "and I tell you, I wash my hands of her. If she's missing, I say good riddance. Good riddance to bad rubbish." Despereaux sat up. He looked behind him. Oh, his tail. Gone. Given over to the knife, and where the tail should be, nothing but a bloody stub. "And more foul play! Gregory! Dead!" shouted the cook. "Poor old man! That rope of his broken by who knows what, and him lost in the dark and frightened to death because of it. It's too much!" "Oh no," whispered Despereaux. "Oh no, Gregory's dead." The mouse got to his feet and began the long climb down the shelf. Once he was on the floor, he stuck his head around the corner of the pantry and saw Cook standing in the center of the kitchen, wringing her fat hands. Beside her stood a tall woman jangling a ring of keys. "That's right," said Louise. "All the king's men was down there searching for her in the dungeon when they come back up. Who do they have with him? They have the old man, dead. And now you tell me that Mig is missing, and I say, who cares?" Despereaux made a small noise of despair. He had slept too long. The rat had already acted. The princess was gone. "What kind of world is this, Miss Louise, where princesses are taken from right under our noses, and queens drop dead, and we cannot even take comfort in soup?" And with this, the cook started to cry. "Shh," said Louise. "I beg you, do not say that word." "Soup!" shouted the cook. "I will say it. No one can stop me. Soup, soup, soup!" And then she began to cry in earnest, wailing and sobbing. "There," said Louise. She put her hand out to touch Cook, and Cook slapped it away. "It will be all right," said Louise. Cook brought the hem of her apron up to wipe her tears. "It won't," she said. "It won't be all right ever again. They've taken our little darling away. There ain't nothing to live for without the princess." Despereaux was amazed to have exactly what was in his heart spoken aloud by such a ferocious, mouse-hating woman as Cook. So see, they had the same emotions, even though Cook wanted to kill him. What's that remind you of? Cook again reached out to touch Cook. Louise again reached out to touch Cook, and this time Cook allowed her to put an arm around her shoulder. "What do we do? What do we do?" wailed Cook. And Louise said, "Shh, there. Alas, there was no one to comfort Despereaux. And there was no time, anyway, for him to cry. He knew exactly what he had to do. He had to find the king. For having heard Roscuro's plan, reader, Despereaux knew that the princess was hidden in the dungeon. And being somewhat smarter than Migri Sow, he sensed the terrible unspoken truth behind Roscuro's words. He knew that Mig could never be a princess, and he knew that the rat, once he captured the pea, would never let her go. And so, the small mouse, who had been dipped in oil, covered in flour, and relieved of his tail, slipped out of the pantry and past the weeping ladies. He went to find the king. Chapter 40. Forgiveness. He went first to the throne room, but the king was not there, and so Despereaux slipped through a hole in the molding and was making his way to the princess's room when he came upon the mouse council. 13 mice and one most very honored head mouse sitting around their piece of wood debating important mouse matters. Despereaux stopped and stood very still. "Fellow honored mice," said the most very honored head mouse, and then he looked up from the makeshift table and saw Despereaux. "Despereaux," he whispered. The other mice of the council leaned forward, straining to make some sense of the word that the head mouse had just uttered. "Pardon?" said one. "Excuse me," said another. "I didn't hear right," said the third. "I thought you said Despereaux." The head mouse gathered himself. He tried speaking again. "Fellow members." "A ghost! A ghost!" he said, shaking his paw and pointing at Despereaux. The other mice turned and looked. And there was Despereaux Tilling, covered in flour, looking back at them, the telltale red thread still around his neck like a thin trail of blood. "Despereaux," said Lester. "Son, you've come back." Despereaux looked at his father and saw an old mouse whose fur was shot through with gray. How could that be? Despereaux had only been gone a few days, but his father seemed to have aged many years in his absence. "Son, ghost of my son," said Lester, his whiskers trembling. "I dream about you every night. I dream about beating the drum that sent you to your death. I was wrong. What I did was wrong." "No!" called the most very honored head mouse. "No! I've destroyed it," said Lester. "I destroyed the drum." "Will you forgive me?" He clasped his front paws together and looked at his son. "No!" shouted the head mouse again. "No! Do not ask the ghost to forgive you, Lester. You did as you should. You did what was best for the mouse community." Lester ignored the head mouse. "Son, please." Despereaux looked at his father, at his gray-streaked fur and his trembling whiskers, and his front paws clasped together in front of his heart. And he suddenly felt as if his own heart would break in two. His father looked so small, so sad. Lester said again. Forgiveness, reader, is, I think, something very much like hope and love. A powerful, wonderful thing. And a ridiculous thing. Isn't it ridiculous, after all, to think that a son could forgive his father for beating the drum that sent him to his death? Isn't it ridiculous to think that a mouse could ever forgive anyone for such perfidy? But still, here are the words Despereaux Tilling spoke to his father. He said, I forgive you, Pa. He said those words because he sensed that it was the only way to save his own heart, to stop it from breaking in two. Despereaux, reader, spoke those words to save himself. And then he turned from his father and spoke to the whole Mouse Council. You were wrong, he said. All of you. You asked me to renounce my sins. I ask you to renounce yours. You wronged me. Repent. Never, said the head mouse. Despereaux stood before the Mouse Council, and he realized he was a different mouse than he'd been the last time he faced them. He had been to the dungeon and back up out of it. He knew things that they would never know. What they thought of him, he realized, did not matter. Not at all. And so, without saying another word, Despereaux turned and left the room. After he was gone, the head mouse slapped his trembling paw on the table. Mice of the council, he said, we have been paid a visit by a ghost who has told us to repent. We will now take a vote. All in favor of saying that this visit did not occur, vote aye. And from the members of the Mouse Council, there came a tiny but emphatic chorus of ayes. Only one mouse said nothing. That mouse was Despereaux's father. Lester Tilling had turned his head away from the other members of the Mouse Council. He was trying to hide his tears. He was crying, reader, because he had been forgiven. Chapter 41. The Tears of a King. Despereaux found the king in the Pea's room, sitting on his daughter's bed, clutching the tapestry of her life to his chest. He was weeping. Although weeping really is too small a word for the activity that the king had undertaken. Tears were cascading from his eyes. A small puddle had formed at his feet. I'm not exaggerating. The king, it seemed, was intent on crying himself a river. Reader, have you ever seen a king cry? When the powerful are made weak, when they are revealed to be human, to have hearts, their diminishment is nothing short of terrifying. So they're coming down small like regular people. You can be sure that Despereaux was terrified. Absolutely. But he spoke up anyway. Sir, said the mouse to the king. But the king did not hear him. And as Despereaux watched, King Philip dropped the tapestry and took the great crown from his head and used it to beat himself on the chest over and over again. The king, as I've already mentioned, had several faults. He was nearsighted. He made ridiculous, unreasonable, difficult to enforce laws. And much in the way of Miggery Sow, he was not exactly the sharpest knife in the drawer. Because you don't have to be brilliant to be a king. You just have to inherit it. But there was one extraordinary, wonderful, admirable thing about the king. He was a man who was able and willing to love with the whole of his heart. And just as he loved the queen with the whole of his heart, so too he loved the daughter with the whole of it, even more than the whole. He loved the Princess P with every particle of his being, and she'd been taken from him. But what Despereaux had to say to the king had to be said, and so he tried again. "Excuse me," he said. He wasn't certain, really, how a mouse should address a king. Sir did not seem like a big enough word. Despereaux thought about it a long moment. He cleared his throat. He spoke as loudly as he was capable of speaking. "Excuse me, most very honored head person." King Philip stopped beating his crown against his chest. He looked about the room. "Down here, most very honored head person," said Despereaux. The king, tears still falling from his eyes, looked at the floor. He squinted. "Is that a bug speaking to me?" he asked. "No," said Despereaux. "I am a mouse. We met before." "A mouse?" bellowed the king. "A mouse is but one step removed from a rat." "Sir," said Despereaux, "most very honored head person, please, you have to listen to me. This is important. I know where your daughter is." "You do?" said the king. He sniffed. He blew his nose on his royal cloak. "Where?" he said as he bent over to look more closely at Despereaux. One tear, 2 tears, 3 enormous king-sized tears fell with an audible plop onto Despereaux's head and rolled down his back, washing away the white of the flower and revealing his own brown fur. "Sir, most very honored head person, sir," said Despereaux as he wiped the king's tears out of his own eyes. "She's in the dungeon." "Liar!" said the king. He sat back up. "I knew it. Oh, rodents are liars and thieves. She is not in the dungeon. My men have searched the dungeon." "But no one really knows the dungeon except the rats, sir. There are thousands of places where she could be hidden, and only the rats would know. Your men would never be able to find her if the rats did not want her found." said the king, and he clapped his hands over his ears. "Do not speak to me of rats and what they know," he shouted. "Rats are illegal. Rats are against the law. There are no rats in my kingdom. They do not exist." "Sir, most very honored head person, that is not true. Hundreds of rats live in the dungeon of this castle. One of them is taking your daughter, and if you will stay in..." "I can't hear you," he shouted. "I cannot hear you. And anyway, what you say is wrong, because you are a rodent, and therefore a liar." He started to hum again. And then he stopped and said, "I have hired fortune tellers and a magician. They're coming from a distant land. They will tell me where my beautiful daughter is. They will speak the truth. A mouse cannot speak the truth." I'm telling you the truth, said Despereaux. I promise. But the king would not listen. He sat with his hands over his ears. He hummed loudly. Big fat tears rolled down his face and fell to the floor. Despereaux sat and stared in dismay. What should he do now? He put a nervous paw up to his neck and pulled at the red thread. And suddenly, his dream came flooding back to him. The dark and the light, and the knight swinging his sword. And the terrible moment when he realized the suit of armor was empty. And then, reader, as he stood before the king, a wonderful, amazing thought occurred to the mouse. What if the suit of armor had been empty for a reason? What if it had been empty because it was waiting for him? You know me. That was what the knight in the dream had said. Yes, said Despereaux out loud in wonder. I do know you. I can't hear you, said the king. I have to do it myself, said the mouse. I will be the knight in shining armor. There is no other way. It has to be me. Despereaux turned. He left the weeping king. He went to find the threadmaster. Why does he need the threadmaster? What's he gonna do for him? Does it have to do with the thread around his neck? That's what he does. We'll find out next time. Bye, guys.